Well, I'm a land use planner, so I may say things that some of you think are crazy. And there are going to be absolutely no hydrographs in this presentation. So I'm going to begin our story by talking about the article that was in the Wall Street Journal December of last year. Doug Placencia mentioned this on Tuesday. This article is a summary of a report done by one of the larger determination companies in an attempt to better assess flood risk for the lending institutions who are their primary clients, which we are all working towards. So one of the sentences that, of course, first caught our eye: which state has the highest hidden flood risk? The answer, Arizona.
Now if you'll buy that, I got some oceanfront property in Arizona.
Sorry, it had to be said. We do take our floodplain management very seriously here in Arizona. We're all participating in the NFIP, a lot of CRS communities, and despite being a desert, we do know we have flood risk. So we thought, well, maybe they know something we don't know. It goes on to state that Arizona has the highest percentage of homes that are outside of the FEMA special flood hazard area, about 68%. Not sure what this is in relation to or comparative with other communities. But to me as a land use planner, I'm thinking, hey, we've done a good job with land use planning if our people aren't in a high-risk area. So still scratching our heads, we're a little perplexed, and I'm sure a lot of you who may have seen this article are like, does it even rain in Arizona? Isn't that a desert? We have water. How did they get top billing? Well, maybe there's more explanation there. Aha! It says, in the case of Arizona, the surprising high flood risks now stem from the fact that a large portion of Phoenix lies along the Salt River, which has wide floodplains, and that we have this interlaced system of canals throughout our area. Well, these are not untrue statements, but let's look at some numbers and a graphic to better identify that. Maricopa County is 9,200 square miles. It's very large. We have 25 cities and towns within that area, and 23 of them are in an urban core of about 2,200 square miles. We've got a population of about 4 million residents, and we've already done well over 4,100 lineal miles of delineation, much to the annoyance of our residents. That equates to about 750 square miles, which is about 38% of that urbanized area where most of our delineations are concentrated in the developed area. I wouldn't be proud to say we have 75% of our residents living in floodplains. We have about 3,000 square miles of D-zone, which I'll explain when we get to the graphic, and only 214 square miles that are outside of the 500-year floodplain. And this can be explained a little bit more in the graphic. So here's a 3D image of the jurisdictional boundary of Maricopa County, and just to put it in perspective again, 9,200 square miles. State of New Jersey is 8,700, the country of Holland, 2,200, about equal to our urbanized area, and the state of Rhode Island, 1,200. So we have a very large area that we are dealing with. The areas that aren't delineated, those are our D zones. It's the Tonto National Forest, other federally and state held lands, and the Goldwater Gunnery Range, which they're blowing stuff up there, so people are not going to be living there, not going to spend tax dollars there. Our mountaintops, certainly we're not going to delineate floodplains there right now when we've got a vast area and limited dollars. That kind of greenish blob that you see to the upper part of the screen, that's that urbanized area where those 23 cities and towns are concentrated. And the Salt River is that blue line that runs through the kind of the southern portion of that. So as you can see, the population is spread considerably away from the Salt River, and the floodplain is not that wide in comparison to some of other areas across the country. Additionally, you all flew in, a good number of you flew in, and you landed at Sky Harbor Airport, which is next to the Salt River project, and you didn't see a lot of water there, did you? And other than the Tempe Town Lake, which is about a mile long of a controlled feature, we have a lot of sand and gravel mining going on in our river. So it's not really a desirable area to put residents against. So a lot of the area there is really industrial. So there might be other reasons why there would be flooding. So that river, the river system has also got a series of dams on it. They have flood storage built into them. So now we start looking at it, and there's a lot more variables within Maricopa County that we would need to factor in order to determine flood risk. And zooming in at a little bit more of an angle on that image, you can see we have mountainous areas, so we're going to get a lot of flash flooding from that, and then we have very flat valleys, which lend to sheet flow. So in keeping with the theme of managing, floods where mountains meet the desert, we certainly have that, and someone told me the other day that that's called an alluvial fan. I think we've often referenced this as too many aluminum cans in the area when FEMA wants to map it for us. So I'm going to take a different approach here and kind of stay at this high level, kind of zooming over our area with a drone to talk about the comprehensive whole of everything that we have done over the years that have made us successful. And just my emphasis is really that it's a constant, continuing effort that we need to, stay alert on. So what are the flood risks in Maricopa County? We have 2 rainy seasons. Our winter rains that can maybe sometimes park a storm over us. If we get a lot of snow or rain in the high country, we may see the dams having to do releases through the Salt River and other systems, but we have enough warning time and heads up to deal with that. Our average annual rainfall is only 8 inches, so we're not seeing a lot of rain throughout the year and a lot of rainy days. So as I mentioned, the flash flooding and the sheet flow due to our geographic conditions. We've also been in a drought for 20 years. We have a mobile population with snowbirds moving in and out and new people moving here every month. It's hard to put our hands out to the politicians and the taxpayers and say, hey, can you give us a lot of money to build you some flood control structures, when until last Friday we'd gone well over 100 days without seeing a drop of rain. I don't think there's a lot of areas that can say you might end up 3 months or 6 months with no rain at all. And just to show, we do get a little flooding in here. This was a 2014 storm where pumps failed on the freeways due to receiving 8 inches of rain in a 6-hour period. So we had our annual rainfall in less than a half of a day. And then, of course, this is runoff from the mountains in the other photo. So just some other quick photos of some flooding in the area. And we have a lot of people, as in many areas, that have developed before floodplain delineations were done. So they sit there in the middle of what's now the floodway. We've got regulations, so we have people elevated and out on the fringe and also elevated. Again, this is that 2014 storm. The ag exam, that's one of the discussions here, how to deal with agricultural structures. These people thought we don't need any permits. We'll just go ahead and plop our nursery down. So long as we stay out of that small sandy bottom there, we'll be okay. Not okay. We tried to tell these people, you're going to run into a hazard. There's floodway all here. So clearly we've identified the hazard, but we struggle with people ignoring the hazard. And again, just some homes that were flooded during the 2014 storm because the structures built in the area could not completely hold the capacity. During that 2014 storm, we had probably about 100 homes valley-wide out of maybe several million homes that flooded. And while that's not to the magnitude of what others have seen, it's certainly, we would rather say 0 homes flooded and we went about our business. And again, in Wickenburg in 15. So anywhere in the county, we might see flooding somewhere because we're a very large county. And I'm going to touch on the Wickenburg thing a little later in the presentation. So quickly staying at that high level, our legislature created flood control district legislation in 1959. And each county is required to have a flood control district. We have spent $2.3 billion over a little over a 50-year period here just in Maricopa County, building 151 different structures to try to handle the areas that were developed prior to having mapped these hazards and identified them. This was done in partnership with the federal government, with our state government, and our local areas, because we certainly can't do this alone. And we are a regional entity, so we focused on the larger structures at first. But all of the structures require continual operation and maintenance. So again, it's that diligence, it's that constant ongoing effort, state inspections and so forth. After the 2014 storm, we reached out to our stakeholders and said, what are we missing? What else is out there? We know we have a list of projects. We've got studies that have identified things. And some of our smaller communities haven't come to that table yet to help build things. And we assessed another $2.3 billion worth of work that still needs to be done. Do you go to the taxpayers and say, give us some more money so we can speed this up, or do you just continue the steady process and hope to educate? Quickly, here's a map that shows how these structures are scattered all over. And in doing these in partnerships, about half of these have been turned over to these cities and towns. A lot of these are parks and recreational features, because if we're going to put something in a community with the tax dollars and it only rains 10 days out of the year scattered throughout, you want it to be a useful and an amenity to that community. Like Houston, we have that ring of dams that were around the urbanized area, but everybody's moving beyond that yet now. So we have to continually stay diligent. And I kind of like to pick on the engineers here. But we had those nice urban environments. You've got to come in and squeeze those type projects in. So you do it with the channel. You're moving the water out of Dodge as fast as you can. And I call that our pre-trapezoidal period. And I had to put the dinosaur there so you get the joke. Then we started getting into these nice little slope sides, and a lot of our freeway infrastructure for drainage will look like that. The skateboarders love that kind of thing. Ironically, these things end up still getting used as recreational features. So moving on, we kind of moved on up to that lovely soil cement period. A lot of our levees along our rivers, soil cement, very attractive. This, by the way, is the Agua Fria River. This is how all of our rivers normally look. You know, there's vegetation growing all over there, and until you get a release from one of those dams, you're not usually seeing water there. Then we graduated to some nicer stuff. We got some trails along a lot of these levees or these structures, and we're kind of staining that concrete and using some of the newer technology as we've progressed over this 50, 60-year period. So structure success real quick. This is Indian Bend Wash. It's actually a wash, and this was the pre-trapezoidal period. The residents said no to the bond to build one of those lovely concrete line channels, and decided, the Corps of Engineers worked with the city to build what equates to about 8 or 9 lineal miles of a park feature. The majority of the year, people are in volleyball tournaments, picnics, playing, having a great time. And kind of pay attention to that little red feature that's up at the top there. This is Indian Bend Wash. 2008, Tim Murphy, I'm sure you're out there, took this photo as he was flying off to one of his TMAC meetings or something he did in DC. And this is what that does. This is the actual wash. Homes weren't flooded, businesses weren't flooded, and you couldn't cross roads at the time, but it's a useful feature year-round, and then a couple times a year you'll see it like this. Again, this is another large project that was built up in the town of Wickenburg. If you look to your left-hand side, you'll see some tiny dots standing on the top there. Those are people. This is how it looks the majority of the year. After 3 to 4 inches of rain fell in a half an hour on the mountains there, this is how the 3 dams looked there. The community would have been devastated if we hadn't come through and built these structures to protect the existing environment. But the structures, we can't just go home when rain's coming and say, yay, we built some structures, it's all good, they'll take care of themselves. You know, we've done O&M, we've done inspections all throughout the years with the state, with the feds, but we have to have daily weather information. We've got to have a flood warning and alert system, emergency action plans, inundation maps, which I've seen, I know that's a big issue also, response plans, 400 alert stations spread throughout the county so that we know what's coming towards our structures, that we can then mobilize our emergency people, our O&M people if needed in order to watch for seepage, watch for structure failure, to let the emergency management people in the Red Cross and others know that they might be needed. We also have a real problem here. We're not going to put culverts on every road or put bridges over because there's not enough rain, so we got a lot of things called low flow crossings. And we have population during the summer, they're headed out to work at 3, 4 in the morning. Construction workers start early, and we need to make sure that they're not driving into these flooded washes they can't see. So we've now had a partnership with our Department of Transportation in order to get flashing road signs out there so that they know, don't go this way. You might not make it. So what are some other actions? Watershed planning studies. We couldn't build these structures or know where to put the flood warning system in place unless we've gotten out there and done a watershed by watershed study, which we've pretty much done for most of our county. And we've been able to get ahead of development so we can get those delineations out there and have people build smarter and build better. And so, of course, floodplain delineation is one of our primary tools that we use to alert people and to help them better use their property. We have floodplain regulations in place since 1974. They are above the minimum standards of the NFIP. But we also have companionable drainage regulations because in the Zone X, you're not subject to the floodplain regulations. Subdivisions are required to build retention basins, hold water on site. Houses have to be built, they're not right on ground, they might be 8 or 12 inches up. So there's a lot of different requirements, and variables that factor into, if you're sitting in that zone X, how is it a high risk or is it a much lower risk, because a lot of these other things have been put in place. But none of this was done, the structures, any of these studies were done without our partnerships. While we're a regional entity, we have to have that cooperation and that coordination, because the water does not stop at jurisdictional boundaries. And large county, we're a $60 million to $100 million funded organization, which is great, and that helps us do things, but we have to do it through a structured process. We have a capital improvement program, and we have a prioritization procedure. Every year, we reach out to our stakeholders, we say, give us your projects that you're identifying need doing, and we will bring our committee together, we score everything, and then we get board approval to get that on the list, and as the money starts to come in, we tick away at building these projects, which is the long-term success. Much more successful or even more successful is our small projects assistance program. Sometimes it's not convincing the politicians to give you more money, it's convincing some of your colleagues that, hey, there are other ways that we can approach. It doesn't always have to be a regional project. So great success in getting the small projects assistance program off the ground. The flood control district puts $250,000 towards a project. This allows our smaller communities to participate in the programs, and we get some localized flooding taken care of. We also have a flood-prone properties assistance program. Sometimes you can't build a structure. You can't put a culvert in. You just need to get these peoples out of harm's way. We have a lot of people that don't realize that the dry washes are a floodplain and they should not have built there. So just to kind of summarize those program successes, we've had 151 structures that were built over this 50-plus year period, and they all performed successfully during the 2014 storm. You know, we had some minor erosion and other problems. We've had almost 50 of these small projects built since the program started in 2011, with 11 under construction now and the program growing stronger. Only 60 homes removed from these floodways so far, but we're revamping this program and getting it back on track again. One of those successful buyouts was during 2015. One of the washes that did not have a dam on it had 7 or so homes, 10 homes got flooded. The town approached us and said, we really have to fix this problem. In partnership, we bought the 7 homes, they bought all the vacant property, we turned all the land over them, and they will turn it into an open space park-like feature eventually. So in summary of this overview, we're successful because we've done so many different things over the years and continued at it. You know, we get the jokes about it doesn't flood in the desert, why do you need to do this? But every now and then we get reminded by Mother Nature. The planning and delineation studies to get ahead of development, just a steady program of building and working with our partners. We have best practice guidelines, the regulations, drainage policies and standards manuals, hydrology manuals, guidance to our community, the documentation that comes from our area drainage master studies for the developers to use, floodplain and drainage regulations that are certainly enforced, the voluntary buyout, the very successful small projects assistance program. Outreach and education is probably one of our biggest challenges in continuing to do that, and that's one of the areas we're focusing a little bit more attention on. So we're making some modifications to some of our programs. The SPAP, we're allowing, you know, the proposed flooding and not waiting until the damage is done, and working on doing some projects in the unincorporated area where there isn't a partner. We're expanding our FPAP to look at commercial buildings, to do flood proofing there, and working on outreach and education through our interactive flood simulation program. One of our endeavors right now is to get the STEM curriculum in our school systems in conjunction with the science program so that we can better reach out to the children and they educate their parents. And water conservation and open space are certainly instrumental and thought of in every one of our projects that we work on. So with that, thank you.